What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back to a really interesting edition of AmericaTrendsPodcast.com. I'm Larry Rifkin, and with me, my phantom shopper.
Hey, how are you?
John Crossett.
Phantom shopper, all right.
Yeah. I send John out to buy all those unmentionables that I don't want to be seen carting around. Right, John?
That's right, phantomly.
John, go into
I whisk in and
ladies' lingerie. Now, John, do you like to shop?
No. I like to shop. I like to know what I'm getting, and I want to go in, go out. I don't want to mess around.
Bing, bang.
Yeah, that's it. Boom.
I'm like that. I'm like a laser. I get in there, man. I know exactly where I'm going. And if it's not there, I just skedaddle. I'm out of here. I don't waste any time.
So I'm not a shopper.
You're not a shopper.
I mean, once in a while I have to stop. Like, cards are tough to shop.
Cards?
Yeah, cards.
Well, I mean, that's
cards,
something like
Like
cards.
birthday cards.
Oh, I
that's
see.
Another, cars are another matter.
Cars, yeah.
Oh,
that's not every day.
No.
No, but you're right. And I'll tell you, some of these cards lately are just terrible. I mean, really, you start reading them and you say, who are they writing these for? Or they've got the worst, most ornate look to them that is so over the top with flowers and all kinds of things. It's just grotesque.
It is. It's crazy.
Cards.
But so that trips me up.
Okay, so cards get you to stop.
Yeah, I have to analyze.
How about toiletries? I mean, you get there and you say, do I really need any of this, or toothpaste? I mean, there's so many choices. I mean, that's the thing about shopping in America. One thing you and I cannot say is that we as Americans don't have choice, but it's almost debilitating because the choices are so many.
At some point it is kind of, especially, some of the stuff in the store. But, that's why Costco's great. You go in there, you buy bulk, and you're done.
Yeah, that's right. I'll never have to think about ketchup again for a year. I like that. But, John, you remember, as I do, when we were growing up, and John and I are about the same age. I'm a little bit older than John. But the shops in our city's old downtown, and we would make it a real family event. I'll never forget, in this cute little downtown in the city in which I was raised, you would start on one street, and then they would have the back end of the same building on another street. And it was so cool to come in on one street and go up 3 or 4 flights and then know that you were going to go out another door and a whole nother range of cavalcade of shopping options was going to be available to you. And we used to make that a real event.
Well, that sounds like a real great, because Fairfield, we had the downtown, which was great. We had our little A&P, and then we'd go down and to the shoe store or whatever, but everything was on kind of like one block there. But wow, you had a cool place.
Well, that was cool. It was. But John was from Fairfield, which is one of the most, one of the most interesting zip codes in America.
Well, now,
in terms of wealth and privilege.
Not then.
No, not then. No. But when you think about it, that's a distant memory, because even in the downtown that I'm talking about, that was replaced back in the late 60s, early 70s with a mall.
Right.
And the malls became the thing. Right. And everybody had to go to the mall, and we all had to hang out.
You're absolutely right.
Right?
You're absolutely
and then that mall from the late 60s, 70s was gutted, and then a new mall came in.
You're absolutely right. We used to go to Lafayette Plaza down in Bridgeport. That's gone. And then we go to Trumbull. You're absolutely right. We neglected the downtowns.
Oh, we forget the downtowns, but we even neglected the old malls and said we're going to the new malls. And now seemingly that mall, that newer mall, is in trouble. Lots of turnover with stores, half-occupied food courts, and they've got more foot traffic for Olive Garden or Bertucci's on the outside of a mall, so nobody even goes inside. They have a lot of turnover because the rentals are so high. And oftentimes we're finding, and there's lots of screaming headlines about what's happened to the malls, that once one of the anchor stores goes down, and there are a lot of anchor stores that are in deep, deep trouble these days, like Sears.
Right.
Then once that happens, everything seems to curtail from there.
The domino effect.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
they need to rethink that. They need to make malls more of a, I don't know.
a gathering place.
Well, it is a
town
gathering
square.
place, but they need to, I don't know, they need to do something to get people to come back, really.
But, John, they're not that gathering place anymore. I mean, at one time, you would go there, and you felt you were definitely going to run into a friend or a neighbor. You were going to spend time. It was colorful. There were usually a lot of promotions going on, and people just don't see it that way anymore, not as entertainment. They see it as somewhat convenience, but the unfortunate thing for them is that you've got these little outlet malls and smaller plazas and online shopping that itself is much more convenient.
I've noticed with online shopping is actually the deals are becoming better in the stores now for some things. I mean, I've bought stuff online and then I go in the store and I'm like, wow. So, I mean, they're really making a run to compete, I think, a little bit.
But can you say that uniformly? I mean, because you can go up online now. In fact, I did today, and I found that they had a particular product on sale on Amazon. I usually don't see on sale,
right.
But I mean, literally. So they're learning to compete. They're all trying to figure this out. And the ones that are figuring it out are figuring out how to have both a brick and mortar life and an online life, if they're really
well, that's what
fortunate to do
Amazon's
it.
doing, right? They're opening stores now.
Yeah, evidently they are.
So,
but John, Sears is an incredible story. And I was just reading where Sears is now, believe it or not, they're starting to blame their demise on bad coverage in the media. It sounds like, I don't know if Donald Trump's having that influence even on Sears, where they're blaming it on media coverage. I don't think it's media coverage.
No, I don't think
They
so.
got lost in the woods. I mean, somewhere along the
did.
line. But I want to take us back just to remind us that we talk about disruptors in all these different environments. We did that show about competing with luck.
Yep.
And now you've got to look back and see that Sears was the original disruptor, because they took out a lot of mom and pops way back when.
You're right. They had the catalog.
The catalog, right.
That was
the catalog,
great to get that catalog.
No, it was more disruptive than virtually anything that's now disrupting whatever model they haven't fixed. It's pretty remarkable when you look at these trends.
Think about it. You're right.
So, you didn't buy that shirt or that tool at Sears because I told you that their stock price was plummeting. I mean, you bought it because it was a great product,
right?
Because it was accessible to you. And now, of course, they've sold off the Craftsman line to Black & Decker.
Great line of tools.
And they're closing a lot of their stores. We're going to be talking about all of this today because it's getting so much attention. I clipped really, literally dozens of articles about what's going on with retail and the malls. And you notice it yourself, even in the mall that we have locally here.
Yeah, it's just nobody's shopping. There's a big hangout, really.
Well, it's older folks now walking around the mall to get away from the inclement conditions outside. That's not exactly what the mall was hoping for.
That's what I mean. They got to reinvent themselves. They got to figure out what's going to attract people to come there. What they need to do. That's really how they're going to save it in the future, if they're going to save it at all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, are they going to succumb to all the online shopping, to the fact that you can now have kind of a catalog store where you go online, you take a look at it, and you pick it up somewhere locally, and maybe they can hope that they still have some inventory, and that in addition to picking up what it is you ordered from them online, that you'll also shop around a little bit. I don't know.
Or that drone will drop it off for you.
The drone. Drop it right in your backyard. Well, today on AmericaTrendsPodcast.com, we are going to be talking retail in America at wholesale prices. John, we're going to do it.
Good. We better do it.
We've taken 50% off the purchase price.
We're blowing it out.
Of this podcast. We're going insane. Nothing will be on our shelves by the end of this. Well, we have Wayne D'Amico joining us to discuss all of this. He's a certified commercial investment member and involved with a company called XCELIGENT. And he does strategic planning for them. And our friend Tom Hill is going to be joining us.
Yeah, good.
And Tom, there's no better salesman than Tom.
Boy, that's for sure. He is Mr. Salesman.
So we're going to have Wayne D'Amico, Tom Hill, and you're going to hear lots of things that are really going to be illuminating about the retail environment today.
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, Tom Hill, it's good to have you as a co-host with us today. John Krofsik and I, and you brought to our attention this gentleman, Wayne D'Amico. Just tell us a little bit about Wayne.
Brainiac.
Brainiac?
Big smile.
Okay.
Great musician, engineer, and really, really smart about commercial real estate.
Okay, we've set you up, Wayne. You've got to really hit it out of the park.
I'll do the best I can.
I know you will. Well, of course, you know so much about commercial investment and real estate, and we've been reading all kinds of stories, and they are everywhere, about the demise of retail and the malls, retailers going bankrupt at a staggering rate on a flood of store closures. What do we make of this?
Well, there's a lot of conjecture out there. I think that there's a couple of factors that have been affecting the retail marketplace, but in Connecticut in particular, one of the scenarios is that we happen to be a part of a big wave of development through the 90s and the early 2000s that was unprecedented in general, just with the expansion of retail. So as happens with a lot of generic real estate categories, I think one of the factors that maybe not that complicated is the fact that they just simply overbuilt in general, but that's been compounded based on some of the other realities, which are discussions about e-commerce and online alternatives and the like. So it's a complicated issue, and so retail's not dead, but it appears as though it's worse probably than it is because there's a lot of overbuilt property that is going to have to be, it's going to be empty and it's going to have to be repurposed.
So is it more about the onslaught of e-commerce, or is it really this combination? In other words, we're still reading that about 85% of the shopping that goes on is done at brick-and-mortar stores. So it's not all that e-commerce has taken over 50% of the business.
That's actually right. That's an interest. It's the opposite statistic that I'm used to looking into. One of the numbers I like to look at is the percentage of online as the total. And yes, those numbers, you said 85 the other way around, but yeah, the numbers, I think under 10% actually of what the total online, sales of total retail sales is. So yeah, I think you see numbers like percentage growth of this year's shopping season, was double digits from last year. But when you're at 1 and go to 2, it's 100%.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I'm getting lost in numbers already. But as a broker, Wayne, I'm running around with customers that want new centers or new locations, and I think a lot of this has to do with the retailers out-positioning each other and the old stuff getting left behind. And they say Connecticut is under-demolished, so I think there's a lot of out-positioning folks. Do you agree?
Well, I do, and I think that it depends on the property, the use, and what the category was. For example, Blockbuster, right? The quintessential example. You don't need Blockbuster stores because they're out of business. Like the whole category's gone, right? Netflix went to your mailbox, and then before you know it, it was coming in through your cable line.
Yeah, exactly. And when we look at the mall situation, lots of folks are writing about malls and the death of them, and many articles have been put forward in Wall Street Journal and other places. And people don't seem to see malls as the great entertainment destinations that they once were.
Actually, it's interesting you say it that way, Larry, because the evolution of malls is actually that they're becoming entertainment destinations.
Oh, really?
Well, so it's interesting that you're you're mentioning that it was an entertainment venue of sorts, but it wasn't designed that way, right? It was designed as a place for shopping for goods and services and then food, right? So there was a food court thing, but the fact that people walked around the mall for something to do on Friday night isn't quite the definition of entertainment. It's going to a more authentic version, which is like Mall of America is the most extreme version. I happened to be out in Minnesota recently and saw it for the first time, and the entire core of that is an indoor amusement park. And I suppose if I looked at the square footage, it might be bigger than Lake Compound's inside.
No, absolutely. But I guess what I was getting at was I think that at the beginning, as much as they weren't built as entertainment destinations, because we had gutted our downtowns where we used to go for a lot of entertainment and least sharing of a common experience, we all said, well, I guess now we are vanquished to the mall, and everybody went there, and they didn't find necessarily entertainment, but they began to run into each other and spend more time there.
Well, that's right, and the Blueback Square in Hartford, for example, is the conversion of the traditional interior mall, right? Where it is about the replication of an old village downtown lifestyle environment, but it was more about the store opening to the street sidewalk and people living upstairs and more a part of your daily routine, weekly routine. So I definitely get where you're going, but I think malls are still viable. They are still being designed. They are still being built. But in Connecticut, for example, if you look at the history of the Meriden, it used to be the Meriden Square, right? The Meriden Square killed the downtown, which had a 1960s Rosensheen Mall in the downtown too. So even the downtown had an immediately contiguous mall developed. That didn't kill the downtown, but when the mall went near the highway, it killed the downtown and the mall in the downtown. But that's now been converted to one of these hybrid centers where it's got some stores accessible from the outside. It's got some of the traditional stuff on the inside, but it's having its challenges. It lost its JCPenney. It lost its. It has a Sears, but you know the future of that, the Lord and Taylor, the evolution. It was the number 2 or 3 behind West Farmsford for decades.
And Wayne,
as far as traffic, but now it's almost obsolete in less time than you can blink an eye.
And Wayne, they have a Boscov's over there. I get my suits there.
Well, and so I guess there is a customer for it then, yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
But I'm seeing, though, that the malls in the major markets, L.A., Miami, big major markets where there's money, they're fighting and building new malls and out-positioning each other. And I think and there's a lot of malls that are closing because they're just not in the smaller markets because they're not appropriate to what the customers want. They haven't upgraded them, and then other people are buying them for dirt cheap and trying to reposition them, and as Wayne just pointed out, putting stores on the inside. Then when you talk about entertainment, yeah, Waterbury Mall was the hangout. It killed this area too. But with that said, now you go to these malls in major markets, you've got bowling alleys, cinemas, you've got ice skating rinks, you got rock and roll concerts. They're starting to run these things like a circus because they need to draw the folks, and they're hoping they'll shop more. Fancy restaurants. Are you seeing the same, Wayne? Because I know you travel all over the country.
All over the country, yeah.
Well, yes, it is, and it's well, they're all searching for the right formula. That's the right and mall versus shopping center. It's all semantics. In the end, the occupants of this physical infrastructure, these brick and mortar, are people that are trying to capture human beings that are in proximity to walk by. It's kind of like a frog, right? A frog sits on a lily pad and it catches flies that go by, right? So brick and mortar retail is the same thing. You've got to be in an area where there is a volume of people in proximity going by, and then they have to be the people that have a demographic of income and desire and demand for the product that you're selling at that location. And that's the part that when you're in a Connecticut, like many, many other places in the country, it's not just a Connecticut thing, but Connecticut is having a challenge with being made up of a demographic that is in a high shopping expenditure growth pattern. Does that make sense? We've got, what was it in the paper today? I think I saw, what did we hit, 1% growth?
Yeah,
last
it's very, very low.
Something insignificant. But retailers that are involved with the decisions of locating somewhere, which is what drives the building of the property. The developer builds the property because there's enough tenants to occupy, right? So what you need to go where there is growth of population that has income and expenditure and a disposable income, and we just don't have the statistics that attract the decisions. The retailers don't choose to come here as a first location in the country because we're not in the growth areas.
And we do want to take a national look at this on America Trends podcast. And so the question really becomes, is it really about losing anchors? Is that really the first telltale sign that a mall is in trouble? Or is it whether they're positioned in an urban environment that is sluggish or one that is really growing versus a suburban community? I mean, what are the telltale signs that a mall's in desperate straits?
Well, the sign is certainly vacancy. If there's somebody moving out, it could be a combination. So here's the deal. If they move out but they're not out of business, that's your telltale sign. If they move out because they went out of business, that might not have been the
They're
mall.
closing unprofitable locations. And me, as a good broker that's working with tenants, Sandy and I were up in upstate New York in Saratoga Springs last year, and we saw some empty shopping centers. Guess who took them? Schools. And we've been around in Newport and looked at some of these malls and big shopping centers. Guess who were on the out parcels with brand new fancy, they took over old restaurants, dentists and doctors, walk-in medicals. Everybody's trying to find new uses for these buildings because most of them, these malls and shopping centers, are in pretty good darn locations. And if they're not, maybe a church takes them. Do you agree, Wayne?
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly malls anyway. Malls are clearly generally located in top locations because malls were generally put at the highway apexes and all, but they're large, and sometimes the design of them and the way that they're configured is difficult. If you go to the next step, I had done some work over the years with Walmart and disposed of a couple of Walmart locations where the building was built at 125,000 feet, and you would think, oh, well, we'll just put another user for that box, but it turns out that the way it was designed had a major impact on whether it wanted to stay there and whether or not somebody would reuse it. I know we had a Walmart at one point that was about 125,000 feet, which is about, just rough math, 300 by 400. When you have a box like that, you realize that if you chop it up, you end up with something very thin and long, and whoever shops in a store that's long and thin, right? These facilities are designed for the size tenant that they're attracting, and so the reuse for any of these buildings, once the die's been cast that they may no longer be viable, that is a challenge, even though there are some users that pop up, as you mentioned.
Hey, Wayne, bowling alleys with strobe lights and rock and roll bands are coming back for that long and thin.
Maybe.
Wayne, the one group that has gotten the most attention recently, and now they're blaming the media on their demise, seemingly, is Sears. What is the status of Sears? I mean, this was the disruptor of all disruptors when you go back to the catalog and the like. What has happened to them?
Well, I think as with many of the companies that you see over the years that were once the top, there's clearly a lot of competition, and my guess is, from what I've seen, is the only reason they haven't survived, or are probably not going to survive very well, is that they didn't make the decisions soon enough to remain relevant, and they got in a very crowded field. So, you can have a brand start from scratch and change the world. Sears and other companies can re-engineer. Think about even Kentucky Fried Chicken in the retail game. Kentucky Fried Chicken was virtually dead 5-6 years ago. They had, they are all over the world, but they've reinvigorated their brand here in the U.S. just from an ad campaign. And Sears did not do anything that I saw to remain relevant and competitive in the business, and it got out ahead of them.
Yeah, well, Kentucky Fried Chicken is sending their new sandwich into space.
And we may be sending Tom Hill into space.
No, but that's what it takes.
No, you're right. You've got to get very creative.
Bingo.
But they then did take on Kmart, and they've sold Craftsman. What happened to them versus, say, Walmart?
Well, and I'm not sure, because who knows what the deal is with Walmart, quite frankly. Walmart's experiencing...
You think they're in trouble?
That's not a secret. Walmart is experiencing woes, and you can't do it at any bigger scale than they are, and they've re-engineered an awful lot in their entire strategy. But I think with the Kmart and Walmart, it's a little different than Sears. Because Sears was the everything to everybody original catalog department concept, right? But Walmart, is trying to figure out just how to bridge the gap between the demand for online and servicing offline and brick and mortar, and so their numbers are not all of growth in the last 3-4 years at least. So no, even they aren't necessarily the big successes. But I think they're all at challenge. Bottom line is Sears. Maybe it's a dead deal. But even a Walmart is absolutely at a critical point to figure out what is the right formula. And I think it's the balance. I think the way it seems to be, the sentiment seems to be, you have to do both, and you have to do both well. Meaning have an online demand for your products, also know how to deal with an in-store experience. I mean, think of what's happening. Amazon is coming out of the
into brick and mortar
clouds and building
But
stores.
who's the best example of that omni-channel now?
Well, I think it's evolving to be omni-channel. I think Amazon's clearly the killer in the online space, and then they're effectively slowly figuring out how to service a customer with a storefront. I think the size is what's going to be the part that probably ends up being a casualty, right? I don't think anybody needs the size of inventory in their location, so I don't know that there's a winner right now.
And Wayne, remember at International Council of Shopping Centers, they've been talking about omni-channel for years, and now JCPenney, you can go pick it up in the store, and a lot of these stores are trying to have, when you buy online, they're trying to tell you pick it up in the store in case you want to change it, if you have any questions on that, et cetera. And back to Walmart, do you still get invited to their national real estate type meeting every year for the business you did with them?
Yeah, I've happened to be involved with them the last 15 years or so, and they work with brokers like me around the country, and so yes, I'm very active. They have a lot of CCIMs, which is what Tom and I share as a credential in the real estate space, and so I am very familiar with what they're doing. Nobody likes talking about whether their stock is down and they're having a challenge, but yes, I'm still close with them.
Well, when you have quarterly returns to satisfy Wall Street are a real challenge, and not everybody needs something every day or every quarter. And then when you have an aging population, you get to the point you don't need as much stuff, and you're not in shopping as often.
Well, that's actually an interesting animal. You asked about which one's killing it in the omnichannel category. I really don't believe anybody comes to mind as doing it. I think it's a business in flux in that area. But the one thing that I see as a trend is the people dynamic that you're alluding to. I just don't know that we know how the next spending generation is going to spend their money.
At SIOR, Eric Qualman from Harvard said everything's got to be geared to the phone because the younger people want to look on their phone and order it. So I think it's going to go more that way. So if you're a brick and mortar, like the mall's got the rock climbing, maybe they want to come climb the rocks and order from the top. When they get to the top level, they might order something on their cell phone if it's in their back pocket. But have you seen him speak at any of the conventions you go to, Eric Qualman?
No, I haven't, but it's interesting what you're talking about there, though. That's talking to the difference of what you spend the money on, which is where I was going. Spending your money on your life experience, doesn't necessarily result in owning stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people are told that these experiential things lead to a lot more happiness than a lot of stuff that you ultimately just want to get rid of or is obsolete within the next year. What about this internet competition, though? I mean, is this driving a lot of comparison shopping so people are actually going out so they can touch and feel and see the materials? And is it becoming like a great price equalizer, the internet, where you can't really tell someone that you're charging $39.99 when they can go on their smartphone while they're in your store and see it for $28.77?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, Larry, and it was along the lines of when you sit in a room and you talk about this kind of stuff,
yeah,
it's people like us, Okay, and when I say that, it's people that are, you have a career, you've been in the public space, and you're living on a higher level of society than many people, right? And the people that buy stuff are not a lot of people. There's a lot of humans in the world that spend some money on a lot of stuff, but when you talk about really the utility of the phone and all, I still think there's a huge segment of the population, be it old, young, but mostly demographic, where income and expendable resources are. I think there's certain people that they still do it the old way, and there's going to be driving by these stores and buying things. But the question is, what do they have an option to buy at the locations versus the people like you're saying? So it just kind of depends on what people are buying.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about the urban millennials and where they're headed, because I would imagine that most retailers are thinking about them, where they're going in the future. Because I read one quote, and I'd love to get your reaction and Tom's. Malls aren't dead at all. This is Stephen Dennis, president and founder of Sageberry Consulting. For all the talk of how much shoppers have migrated online, 90% of retail, as you said, still done in physical stores. And that's changing about 1% a year. But he is indicating that the biggest decline in these brick-and-mortar facilities are the middle ground, the middle retailers, Macy's, Penny's, Sears. The high end and the low end are still doing well. I guess the dollar stores would be the best example of that.
Well, I put 3 in lately, but, I'm 65. On my way home, I need to buy white cleaning strips for my teeth, some vitamins.
Yes, you do.
And
you
some
really
other
do.
odds and ends that I'm going to the drugstore to buy them. I'm not going to get that stuff online, so I guess we all have our different habits on how we shop. So, and then I still find old habits die hard. I still find myself maybe going to the store because it's a habit, but I think those middle people, in the middle ground, they're suffering, like Wayne said. Their stores are giant, they have big overhead, and not everybody goes out to shop.
Wayne, what do you think?
Well, I think... I'm with you on the idea that people still go out, but I guess the issue is what is the right mix of what people want, right? And so I think online, when you mentioned you have access to it, you may price compare. You're also going to be able to quality compare, but not for the touch and feel, right? So you can read that both things are made of cotton and look nice, but in the end, some of that stuff people just don't feel comfortable until they've touched it and felt it. So I think it is a blend, but it's harder to make any kind of a premium when you at least have a reference to the same thing being available somewhere cheaper.
Absolutely. By the way, some say that a lot of the turmoil that we're talking about is not based on the online space, but really the decades ago, and you guys would know this so well, there was this buying spree going back many years when a lot of us were starting our families, and many of us who are now baby boomers and were beginning to retire. It was all flush with easy money, and we overbuilt in this retail space. That's what they're saying we're really seeing now is a bubble. What do you say to that, Wayne?
Well, I was just with an economist I do hold in high regard. He's the chief economist for Stewart Title, named Ted Jones, and Ted actually did just make a presentation at an event I had at the New York Stock Exchange recently, and he said, I believe we're on the verge of a retail boom. And his premise was that everybody talks about millennials changing their lifestyle, he says, but all they did is kick the can on them becoming traditional. And he said that they're all going to start realizing that they're going to have to live in a little bit bigger place because they're going to start getting married. They're going to start having children. They're going to have children later in life than we might have. And there's more of them doing that, but it doesn't mean they're not going to have children. And he says when they do that, they're going to have new places. And what do they have to do when they get new places? They're going to have to buy dishes and chairs and furniture.
Johnny Cage just called it stuff.
And stuff.
But we read about them that they're much more particular, and they have certain tastes that may go in a different direction than ours, and they don't want the big box experience. They want something that's more boutique and more specialized and makes more of a statement about them.
Maybe. It depends what they want us, because people like the best price too, and the boutique places are more expensive than the big box, and I think your personal preference is going to come into. Wayne, you got 2 kids. What do you see your kids shopping, and what are they doing when they want something? They're teenagers.
Yeah, in the end, they end up no matter whether they don't like the idea, but they end up like you, right? I mean, they're a product of you, and so they'll end up in similar taste.
I thought you meant like Tom Hill.
Oh, I was getting nervous.
Oh my goodness, what went wrong there, Wayne?
No, I'm sorry. I meant you in the
Yes.
plural sense, not the Tom sense. But anyway, I think that they tend to like the same things. They maybe haven't expressed it yet. But again, they're going to be in a certain strata because of the opportunity they had being my kids, for example. But there's a whole bunch of other people that they didn't have a lot of stuff, and they're going to make their own. You don't know what they're going to like when they finally get a job and they finally get out and.
So
and
you're saying that
lives.
a lot of these kids are getting out of the basement now. They may have been forming their lives a little bit more slowly. Say we were married at 25, they're getting married at 32, but that's beginning to happen.
That's exactly what the point of this economist was, is that pent-up demand does exist. I do think that there's a chance the smaller, I do think there's another phenomenon in real estate, which is that the housing itself probably does have to shake out where, we also grew and built big houses for few people, and I think there's places in the country that aren't being driven by job growth, which also affects the retail, by the way.
Well, the housing was so good for so long, people said they could put their money in a house because they went up forever.
And they didn't for the first time in decades, this last decade. And that's panic. That's a real panic.
But let me ask you, here we are in 2017. Brokerage estimates estimates that retailers are on pace to close about 8,600 locations this year, and they're just seeing a much greater number than even in the recent past. And things have not been great in this recent period, but 8,600 this year, they're saying that's a dramatic increase. What is it about 2017 that we might be looking at that might be something anomalous or an aberration? What is it?
Actually, the irony is, I think they do projections. When they make these decisions for closure, it's not done in a vacuum and it's not done quickly. So I think they're determining, as many people are, that 17 and 18 are not going to be that great economically, and so they have lean margins and they have to cut the bleeding. Remember, the other thing about retail you have to appreciate is that the real estate seems to be the visible thing we're talking about, but that's not their biggest expense, right? Their biggest expense is goods and employment, and so it's a small number on but keeping the location open forces them to have all the other overhead, but the actual expense of being in a building is minimal. So to close a location is a quick and dirty way to actually cut your top line expense because of the HR at low-performing stores. So they probably made these decisions based on projections that things are going to continue to be slow.
Told you he was a brainiac.
Oh, absolutely.
But, with these stores that close, you see a CVS close, a dollar store jumps in, but that's for, cheaper prices, et cetera. To me, we're lucky in our world as brokers, at least where I am, that empty stores, there's always somebody for them if the price is right. There's always a developer that'll buy an old shopping center and reposition it if he can get it for the right price. Right, Wayne?
Yeah, those days I think are harder to come by, too, though. I absolutely what you're saying. There's a price, but if nobody's driving by and nobody's spending money, there's nothing you can put in the box that is going to make somebody pay anything. Just because your rent's low, if you're losing if you're losing 10 cents a day, you'll make it up in volume.
True, but I guess I'm lucky then. As a broker I'm in the market I'm in, there's always somebody for the right price. For the most part, unless if they're B plus locations, A locations, a little tougher on a C location, but B plus and A, there's always a new user, but they want the applicable discount.
Let me ask you both. I mean, with hard goods now, one of the things that the Internet has been doing, of course, is making shipping and handling free if you're a Prime member or whatever it may be. So you can order just about anything and not have to pay for delivery and the like. And that's really creating, because you can go online to Consumer Reports and see whether LG or Whirlpool, and those are easy things. One of the things that strikes me is that a lot of people still may be going to malls and to retail outlets because they're looking at things like clothing, which are much harder to know whether you're getting the right size and it looks good on you, whatever it may be. But now I'm seeing where a lot of these Internet retailers are saying, we'll send you 3 versions. we'll send you a size 10, a size 8, a size 6, and you can send back the one that doesn't fit. I mean, they're getting pretty wise to what they have to do, too.
Ta-da.
Well, and that's right, and they're trying to figure out. They call it the last mile now, right? That's the catchphrase. It's the understanding of the difference between where the actual sale is occurring, where understanding the demand for the product based on demographic analysis, and then figuring out where you store the product in a distribution facility, and can most effectively do that transportation, incur that transportation and shipping expense in an economical fashion. Right now, when you do an Amazon distribution center, if you order something, some things take longer, some things are prime, some things aren't. All that stuff is based on their figuring out how many people are going to buy what in physical proximity to these locations, meaning that I bought dog food. That's one of the craziest things. I never thought it would make sense to have them ship me a 40-pound bag of dog food, right? Right now, they basically know that I will rebuy that every 2 months. So when I order it, they know that there's one guy buying that bag of dog food roughly every 2 months, and then they know that for all their different customers. So the inventory in the online business is even more intuitive than what it used to have to be on a retail store.
Yeah, their algorithms are brilliant. And
yes.
How long is it going to be before we get to that flex point where they know so much about us and they're so encouraging and they're providing all kinds of sales and opportunities online that it just compels us to stop going out? And many, of course, who are living in an urban environment, they don't even have a car anymore. So they don't want to lug a 40-pound bag of dog food.
It is a logistical issue, but at the same token, the nature of receiving this stuff in those environments is a nightmare. I mean, one of the biggest issues with apartment development is that everybody's now getting everything shipped for that convenience
the
reason
poor
you're talking
doorman.
about. And there's nowhere to store the stuff when between when it's dropped off at 2 o'clock and when the person comes home at 6.
No, it's true. And I was at a CCIM event the other day, and we were talking about repurposing buildings, and they were saying that any of these 20, 30, 40,000-foot warehouse or old manufacturing buildings that are in a city may end up being a warehouse to do this last-mile delivery that Wayne's talking about. Have you been hearing that too, Wayne?
Yeah, you're hearing that, but then let's mess it up even further. We're going to have driverless cars, so apparently we can either have them ship it to us or we can send our car for it.
Oh, my God.
And a car never talks back.
Say,
unless it was my mother, the car.
Oh, that's a pretty quick. Speaking of ordering, can I order you out of the room, Larry?
Yes. Now, Wayne, let me ask you about this. Cities finding life after malls. And this was in the Wall Street Journal recently, and they were talking about Worcester, Mass., where evidently they had a big urban mall, and now they're putting up a hotel and apartment complex. The cities are reclaiming these incredible blocks that used to be just retail for multi-purpose. You see that going on in many places?
Sure. I mean, it's the idea of the reuse. The challenge on the reuse, though, as long as what they plan to use it for is in demand, right? So when it comes to the cities, if it's a Worcester, it's in proximity to one of the beneficiaries of the gateway growth pattern. So it's believe it or not, I mean, it's not in Boston's backyard, but it's actually got impact by what's going on in the Boston metro. And so for them to put housing in Worcester, there's demand. And so you can take a otherwise, poorly thought of in urban mall idea, and you can convert it to that demand for apartments. But you can't necessarily do that where there's really no driving demand for apartments.
Exactly. Jobs and growth. We keep hearing it over and over again. I went to the Connecticut Realtor Day at Bushnell Park in front of the legislature the other day. 2,000 realtors came out, and what they were saying to the legislators, 40 of them came to the stage, and the governor could see out his window. They had signs galore, and what they were saying is, give us a Connecticut we can sell. And that's the issue. I mean, if there aren't jobs and growth and money around, what kind of business can you do?
Yeah, but Larry, along the lines of reuse, we'll touch upon that because that is your kind of, your dying mall concept too. What do you do with it? One of the factors that is very seldom appreciated by the general consumer, the person who lives in a community that has one of these dying buildings, and they just wish things upon it, and they say, well, why can't that be this? Why can't that be this? And they read a trend and all that. But the other reality with obsolete buildings is that the only motivator for doing something with it is if somebody can own it and then in turn rent it to the person that wants to use it at a profit, right? Mm-hmm. That's what drives real estate. And so what happens with many of these secondary market locations, which is where the real issues are, you could be given the mall property for free, okay? But the holding cost of paying taxes and insurance on an empty building while you maybe reconstruct it, the cost to reuse that building, even if you got it for free, it may cost you more dollars per square foot than it's worth when you're done.
Especially on a whopper property like that. And the government's driven up the cost of operating expenses, taxes, water, sewer, electricity. It's gone through the roof. And even if you want to go out and buy a vacation property, you have no mortgage on it, but you have to pay all the operating expenses. Crazy. Hey, Wayne, we had your friend Stanley Nizdowski come out to a CCIM event at a place called Quarry Walk. It's in Oxford, and it's a $70 million live, work, and play medical project anchored by a Market 32 grocery store. And many of the CCNs were saying, how did this ever come in a little growth town, little small country town like Oxford? And Stanley said that if you did regular demographics that CCIMs do in the old days, it would have never went. But he did something called lifestyle demographics to prove to the banks that they should finance this property. Can you help us with that?
Well, so a lifestyle demographic you're talking about is demographics are basically how many people are living in an area. What is their economic strata, meaning when they fill in the census form, what kind of money do they have? Is the household making $50,000 a year? Is it making $100,000 a year? Is it $20,000 a year? That's the generic demographics. Lifestyle demographics, they're also called tapestries and things like this, is where they try to segment generic demographics and try to predispose what the psychology of those consumers are within those demographics. And so an example would be a lifestyle demographic might be that if you have a certain age of people, say between 24 and 32, and they make more than $80,000 a year, then they're going to call them laptops and lattes, right? They're younger people. They're into electronics and computers.
There's a Starbucks in the grocery store already, and they're building 150 units of residential. They're putting a town green and a section in the project for mom and pops and a 30,000-foot medical building. And a lot of it is up already.
And so what they determine is there's enough people for that specific use, even though the total demographics don't normally drop.
Yeah, so it's not just raw traffic data.
Right.
What about one city in Nashville? I just wrote a note when we were out at Quarry Walk, and somebody said something about this development, one city, Nashville. Has that come on your radar?
One city, it hasn't. I mean, is it in Nashville?
Yeah, evidently, and it's
there's a development in Nashville. I was just there recently, and called the Gulch. I haven't heard the one city, but Nashville is actually a very interesting example, though, of one of the few secondary cities that is experiencing tremendous growth, and it has to do with lifestyle. It has to do with the core businesses. It's a little more traditional in the reason it's working. You know, it used to be that a community was built because someone decided to build a factory somewhere, right? And so because there was a factory, the factory needed workers, so then they built houses for the workers, and the community would be built. Nashville just has tremendous demand in healthcare, and of course it's been really experiencing a boom in the music industry, and its physical location is also an asset. I think their pitch economically is that they are within 2-hour flight to 60% of the U.S. population.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah,
I like
so there
airplanes.
are several, including this Gulch area, maybe as one Nashville, if it is in Nashville. There's just all sorts of projects that you can build there because they're experiencing tremendous growth, and they need housing and the like because there's jobs, there's reason to go there, so people are coming.
Yeah, it's all location. You guys have said that for the longest time, and some of the malls that were perhaps placed at a certain time in a certain era, and now there's been all kinds of demographic shifts, and they just may be in the wrong space, and many of them being displaced to buy new kinds of malls whether it's ones that are more lifestyle-oriented, as Tom was mentioning about Quarry Walk. Really an interesting topic, and one that's getting all kinds of attention across the country, and that's why we wanted to have you, Wayne D'Amico. We can't thank you enough, the Executive Vice President for Corporate Development and Strategic Planning at XCELIGENT, and, of course, a member of CCIM, as is Tom Hill III, and just a great discussion today. I thank you both for coming by.
Wayne, love being with you. You've always been me and Sandy's favorite radio guest.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you once again, Wayne. Tom, this is your first episode of America Trends Podcast. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, am I getting paid?
You're getting paid.
Where's my check?
Well, we've talked about our finances on the air.
Uh-oh.
We're a little stretched at the moment. And can you take an IOU?
From you, Larry, my pleasure. Happy to be in the studios of WATR.com.
Absolutely. And again, AmericaTrendsPodcast.com. John Kropsic, I think you enjoyed this conversation undoubtedly.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
And we did discount the podcast today, so we're going wholesale, not even retail on this one, right?
We're blowing it out today.
Johnny added that. He brought up we need more stuff. That drives the retail world. Please buy some stuff.
I'm getting rid of my stuff.
I know. We're all in that process. Well, listen, we're all out of stuff for today, but we filled your head with a lot of important information about retail and malls, and wherever you shop responsibly.
Yes, or go to TomHill.com.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. If you like this episode of America Trends Podcast, will you please leave us a kind rating or a review on iTunes? John, is that too much to ask?
No, or even a comment. Give us in the
Anything.
comment section on the ones that you liked. And, you can also email me at newsletter@rifkinradio.com. And that's another way you can contact us with your ideas.
Don't forget, your review really is important to us. And, John, they may say, why? Why? Why is it so important? Well, the more
why?
you... You're even asking that.
Why?
Well, the more you like us, the better placement we get, which then helps us improve our rankings and visibility so that more people can enjoy us. And the more people, John, you see how this is spiraling?
It's getting out of control there.
The more people who know about us and like our content, the greater chance we have to encourage advertisers to hop aboard. You see how it works now, John?
I understand now. That's very interesting.
And we don't want these folks who are listening to miss a single episode of America Trends Podcast. I mean, we're recording tons of them, aren't we?
No, and they're all very interesting, and we got some really good stuff coming up.
Oh, we really do. But we want you to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher.com. And when you do subscribe, let us know on Facebook and Twitter. Our handle on both platforms is @TrendsPodcast. We want to thank you personally for subscribing. In fact, John may have a very beautiful thank you gift. John, what is it? No? We ran out of them?
All out of gifts.
Oh, my goodness. Well,
Sorry
please,
about that.
please send us your ideas and questions for future episodes and topics on America Trends Podcast. We can't think of them all, right, John?
That's right.
I mean, my head's already exploding.
Oh, yes.
You see it.
I
Cloud
see it.
above. Is there an author you'd love to hear from? Or a subject you'd like to learn more about? Send us your ideas on Facebook and Twitter. And by the way, you can direct message us at Trends Podcast or use hashtag Trends Podcast. You can also add an email address if you have one that you want to give out. And we do not, right, John? We don't share our list.
No spamming, no list getting out. You just get our newsletter.
Absolutely. And you can access our full show archive on our website at americatrendspodcast.com. For more information on America Trends and for the latest updates on our upcoming episodes, be sure to like our page on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. You can find us at Trends Podcast. Oh, by the way, and John, this is really important, and you know.
What is it? What is it?
Well, if you buy from Amazon, we have joined their associates program. So you go to americatrendspodcast.com before you purchase, and you click over to Amazon from our Amazon store.
That's a very good point, because it doesn't cost them any more money to do that.
No, that's all built in.
And then we get a few pesos.
Yeah,
It helps
but
keep
and
the
look,
podcast going.
if we get a small VIG, 2 or 3%, if you don't do it through us, you're just giving more money to Jeff Bezos.
Exactly.
And he doesn't need any more money.
He doesn't need it.
And he
That's
doesn't do
correct.
any podcasts, I don't think. So please, with no added cost to you, it helps us to bring you the content that you're enjoying. And thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Please keep listening.